"This seat isn't for you, son," the flight attendant shouted as she walked toward the young man in business class. "Show me your ticket. Let's see if it's real or fake," she said, drawing the attention of all passengers in the cabin. The young man calmly took out his phone and the morning sun cast long shadows across Los Angeles International Airport as thousands of travelers hurried through the bustling terminals. Among them was Marcus Thompson, a 22-year-old who stood out not for his appearance, but for the calm confidence with which he carried himself despite his modest attire. His simple navy polo shirt and pressed khaki pants were clean and well-fitted, but they paled in comparison to the expensive designer suits and luxury accessories that seemed to define the business-class lounge he was approaching. Marcus clutched his boarding pass tightly, a document that would soon become the center of a controversy he never could have anticipated. The pass read clearly, "Business class, Seat 2A, Flight 447, LAX to Dubai International Airport." This wasn't just any trip for Marcus. It was potentially the most important journey of his young life. 3 weeks earlier, his father, Robert Thompson, had received a call that would change everything for their family business. Thompson Global Trading, which Robert had built from a small halal food import operation in their garage, had caught the attention of some of the largest food distributors in the Middle East. The opportunity to expand into the Dubai market could transform their modest family business into an international enterprise worth tens of millions of dollars. "Son," Robert had said to Marcus over breakfast that morning, "I'm sending you to Dubai because you understand both our values and our vision. This meeting isn't just about business. It's about representing who we are as a family." Marcus had felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. His father had immigrated to the United States 30 years earlier with nothing but determination and faith. Through decades of 12-hour days, careful financial planning, and unwavering commitment to halal business practices, Robert had built Thompson Global Trading into one of the most respected halal food distributors on the West Coast. Now, as Marcus approached the gate, he reflected on his father's journey and the trust that had been placed in him. The Thompson family had always lived modestly despite their growing success. While their business generated millions in revenue, they maintained their humble lifestyle, drove reliable but unremarkable cars, and continued to live in the same middle-class neighborhood where Marcus had grown up. Character isn't about what you own, it's about how you treat others, especially when no one is watching. The boarding announcement echoed through Terminal 6. "We now welcome our business class passengers to board Flight 447 with service to Dubai." Marcus gathered his simple black backpack, the same one he had used throughout college, and joined the line of impeccably dressed business travelers. At the gate, Linda Morrison, the senior gate agent, examined each passenger's documents with routine efficiency. When Marcus approached her station, however, her demeanor shifted noticeably. She studied his boarding pass with unusual intensity, her eyes darting between the document and Marcus's face multiple times. "This is business class?" Linda asked, her tone carrying a hint of disbelief. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied politely. "Seat 2A." Linda scanned the pass with obvious reluctance, the machine beeping its approval. She handed the document back to Marcus without making eye contact. "Have a pleasant flight," she said, her tone suggesting anything but pleasant expectations. As Marcus walked down the jet bridge, he couldn't shake the feeling that Linda's reaction was a preview of what might come. He had experienced similar moments before, occasions when his presence in certain spaces seemed to surprise or unsettle others. His father had prepared him for this reality. "Marcus," Robert had said during one of their evening walks, "there will be times when people question whether you belong in the rooms where success is discussed. Your job isn't to convince them with words, it's to prove it through your character and competence." The aircraft itself was impressive, a modern, wide-body plane with sleek interiors and the latest amenities. As Marcus entered the business class cabin, he was struck by its elegance. Cream-colored leather seats, arranged in a 1-2-1 configuration, provided each passenger with direct aisle access and ample space. Soft lighting created an atmosphere of luxury and comfort.
Marcus located his seat, 2A, a window seat in the second row. As he stowed his backpack in the overhead compartment, he noticed the passenger in seat 2B watching him with obvious interest. The man, who appeared to be in his 50s, wore an expensive charcoal suit, gold cufflinks, and a watch that likely cost more than most people's cars. His nameplate, visible on his laptop bag, read Gerald Patterson, Senior Vice President. "Excuse me," Gerald said as Marcus settled into his seat. "Are you sure you're in the right section? Economy is toward the back of the plane." Marcus smiled politely and showed Gerald his boarding pass. "I'm in the correct seat, sir. Thank you for checking." Gerald examined the boarding pass with skeptical eyes before returning to his newspaper, muttering something under his breath about mistakes and system errors. As more passengers boarded, Marcus became increasingly aware of the sideways glances and whispered conversations. A well-dressed elderly couple in row 1 kept looking back at him with obvious concern. The woman, adorned with expensive jewelry and silk scarf, leaned toward her husband repeatedly, whispering in tones that carried just far enough for Marcus to catch fragments. "Doesn't look right. How did he get... Should we say something?" Marcus had encountered this before. During his junior year at UCLA, he had been questioned by security while studying in the business school library. At a conference in San Francisco, hotel staff had assumed he was there for a service position rather than as an attendee. Each time, Marcus had handled the situation with the grace and patience his parents had instilled in him. "Remember, son," his mother Patricia had often reminded him, "how people treat you says nothing about your worth and everything about their character." As the boarding process continued, Marcus noticed more passengers filing into the premium cabin. There was Jennifer Wu, a tech executive from Silicon Valley whose laptop bag bore the logo of a major software company. Behind her came Dr. Hassan Ahmed, a prominent surgeon from Cedars-Sinai, easily recognizable by his medical conference badge. Then there was Maria Santos, a successful attorney whose designer briefcase and confident strides spoke of courtroom victories. What struck Marcus was how these passengers, all accomplished professionals, were greeted with warm smiles and immediate recognition from the cabin crew. Their documents weren't scrutinized, their presence wasn't questioned. They belonged here, and everyone knew it from the moment they stepped aboard. 10 minutes before departure, the moment Marcus had unconsciously dreaded finally arrived. Catherine Walsh, the senior flight attendant, emerged from the galley with a clipboard in hand and a stern expression that seemed permanently etched on her face. Catherine was a 20-year veteran of the airline, known among her colleagues for running a tight ship and maintaining what she considered proper standards in the premium cabins. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her uniform was pressed to perfection. She wore her seniority like armor, using her authority to create the kind of order she believed first-class service required. Catherine prided herself on being able to spot irregularities from across the cabin, and as her eyes settled on Marcus, every instinct told her something was wrong with this picture. "Excuse me, young man," Catherine said, her voice carrying clearly across the now quiet cabin. "I believe there may be some confusion about your seating assignment."
Marcus looked up from his tablet, where he had been reviewing notes for his Dubai meetings. "Good morning, ma'am. I don't believe there's any confusion. I'm in seat 2A. Catherine's expression hardened. "Business class is reserved for ticketed passengers only. This isn't a waiting area." The nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably. Gerald Patterson looked up from his Wall Street Journal with interest. Jennifer Wu paused in her phone conversation to observe the exchange. Dr. Ahmed frowned at the disruption, but continued reading his medical journal. "I understand, ma'am," Marcus replied respectfully, reaching for his boarding pass. "I do have a business class ticket." He handed the document to Catherine with a calm smile. Catherine took the boarding pass as if it might be contaminated, holding it at arm's length before examining it with theatrical scrutiny. These days, anyone with a decent printer can create convincing fakes, she announced loudly enough for the entire section to hear. I'm going to need to see additional verification. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced in countless similar situations. But his father's voice echoed in his mind. When people doubt your right to be somewhere, don't argue with their ignorance. Let your documentation speak first, and your character speak last. Of course, ma'am, Marcus said evenly. Here are my passport and the credit card I used for the purchase. He handed the documents to Catherine with a calm smile. Catherine made a show of examining each document with exaggerated care. She turned the passport over multiple times, held it up to the overhead light, and even ran her finger across the pages as if checking for irregularities. The credit card received similar treatment, with Catherine examining both sides and comparing the name to the passport multiple times. The photograph on this passport doesn't look quite right to me. The facial features seem different, and this credit card could belong to anyone.
Marcus maintained his composure, though he could feel the eyes of every passenger in the section boring into him. Ma'am, that's definitely my passport photo, taken when I renewed it last year. The credit card is mine as well, and I can provide the PIN if you'd like to verify it. Gerald Patterson had abandoned all pretense of reading his newspaper and was now watching the exchange with obvious fascination. Finally, he said loud enough for everyone to hear, someone's doing their job properly. These budget airlines have gotten so lax about security that anyone can sit anywhere these days. His comment drew murmurs of agreement from some passengers, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Jennifer Wu closed her laptop and watched the scene unfold with what appeared to be growing concern. Dr. Ahmed removed his reading glasses and observed the interaction with the trained eye of someone accustomed to recognizing when situations were escalating unnecessarily. Catherine seemed encouraged by Gerald's support. Her voice grew more authoritative. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to relocate to the economy section while we verify your documentation. We simply cannot allow unverified passengers in our premium cabin. It's a security issue. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had paid for his seat. He had provided all required documentation. He had been nothing but polite and cooperative. Yet here he was, being asked to leave based on nothing more than suspicion and assumptions. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but his father's counsel rang in his ears. When faced with injustice, son, remain calm. Let your character speak louder than their accusations. The truth has a way of revealing itself if you give it time. Ma'am, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the emotions churning inside him. I paid for this seat in full. I have all the required documentation, which appears to be in order. I would prefer to remain in my assigned seat unless there's a legitimate security concern that can't be resolved through normal verification procedures. Gerald Patterson stood up, his chest puffed with righteous indignation. Listen here, son. You're disrupting everyone's travel experience. We've all paid good money for these seats, and we shouldn't have to deal with this kind of disruption. Why don't you just cooperate with the crew and move to where you're supposed to be? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus looked directly at Gerald, his expression calm but his eyes sharp with intelligence. And where exactly am I supposed to be, Mr. Patterson? Marcus asked quietly. Gerald's face reddened slightly. You know exactly what I mean, he replied, his implication crystal clear to everyone within earshot. The cabin fell into an uncomfortable silence. Several passengers looked away, embarrassed by Gerald's barely veiled prejudice. Others, however, nodded in agreement, their faces showing they shared his sentiment even if they wouldn't voice it so directly. Dr. Ahmed cleared his throat softly. Perhaps we should allow the crew to handle this properly, he suggested diplomatically, though his tone carried disapproval for how the situation was being managed. Jennifer Wu looked directly at Catherine. "Have you actually found any problems with his documentation?" she asked pointedly. Catherine bristled at the question. "The verification process is ongoing. Security concerns must be taken seriously." It was at this moment that Marcus realized no amount of documentation or cooperation would satisfy them. Their objection wasn't really about paperwork or security, it was about him, about their discomfort with his presence in what they considered their space. The boarding pass, the passport, the credit card, none of it mattered because they had already decided he didn't belong. Catherine seized on the growing tension. "That's it," she announced dramatically. "I'm calling airport security. Sir, you are being disruptive and refusing to comply with crew instructions. This is a federal offense."
Marcus looked around the cabin one more time. Some passengers avoided his gaze entirely, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but unwilling to intervene. Others, like Gerald, watched with satisfaction, believing they were witnessing the restoration of proper order. A few, including Dr. Ahmed and Jennifer Wu, seemed genuinely troubled by what they were witnessing. In that moment, Marcus made a decision that would change not only his own life, but the lives of everyone on that aircraft. He remembered the promise he had made to call his Dubai business partner once he was settled on the plane. The timing seemed more than appropriate. It seemed providential. Marcus reached into his backpack and retrieved his phone, a modest Android device that looked worn from years of use. The phone was a stark contrast to the latest premium smartphones that nearly every other passenger carried, but it would serve its purpose perfectly. "Ma'am," Marcus said calmly, "before you call security, I need to make a quick business call to confirm my arrival time with my partners in Dubai. It's a time-sensitive matter regarding our meetings tomorrow." Catherine rolled her eyes dramatically. "Make it fast," she said, pulling out her radio. "Airport security is already being contacted." Marcus dialed a number he knew by heart, the direct line to Thomson Global Trading's Dubai office. Despite the early morning hour in Los Angeles, it was already mid-afternoon in Dubai, and he knew Ahmed al-Rashid would be at his desk. The phone rang 3 times before a professional voice answered in lightly accented English. "Thomson Global Trading, Dubai office. This is Ahmed al-Rashid speaking." "Hello, Ahmed. This is Marcus. I'm on flight 447 as scheduled, but there seems to be some confusion about my seating arrangement. Could you please speak with the flight attendant to verify my travel authorization?" Marcus extended the phone toward Catherine, who was still clutching her radio. "Ma'am, our Dubai office manager would like to speak with you to clarify the situation." Catherine looked annoyed, but accepted the phone reluctantly. "This is Catherine Walsh, senior flight attendant." Ahmed's voice was courteous, but carried an unmistakable note of authority. "Good morning, Miss Walsh. I am Ahmed al-Rashid, Regional Operations Manager for Thomson Global Trading. I'm calling to verify the travel arrangements for Mr. Marcus Thompson, who should be seated in business class for his journey to our Dubai headquarters. I understand there may be some concern about his booking." Catherine's expression began to shift slightly as she processed Ahmed's professional tone and formal manner. "Well, yes. There were questions raised about the authenticity of his ticket and identification documents." "I see," Ahmed replied, his tone remaining perfectly professional but carrying a hint of concern. "Ms. Walsh, Mr. Thompson is the son of Robert Thompson, founder and CEO of Thomson Global Trading. He is traveling to Dubai on urgent company business for meetings with major food distributors across the Middle East. His trip is critical to finalizing contracts worth over $12 million. May I ask what specific problems you've identified with his documentation?" Every passenger in the business class cabin was now listening intently. Gerald Patterson's newspaper lay forgotten in his lap. Jennifer Wu had turned in her seat to get a better view of the conversation. Even passengers from economy class were straining to hear what was happening in the premium section. Catherine glanced nervously at Marcus, then at the passengers who were hanging on every word. There were concerns about whether the documents were genuine. "That's quite concerning, Miss Walsh," Ahmed replied. "Mr. Thompson is traveling on a corporate account that Thomson Global Trading has maintained with your airline for over 6 years.
We are a gold-tier corporate client, and this booking was made through our designated travel coordinator. Would it be helpful if I provided the corporate booking reference number for verification?
Catherine's face was beginning to drain of color. A corporate booking reference? Certainly. The reference number is TGT 2024-MC-4521. This should be immediately verifiable in your airline's corporate booking system. Our company maintains detailed records of all travel authorizations, and I can also transfer you to our travel coordination department if additional verification is needed. Catherine's hands were now visibly trembling as she processed what Ahmed was telling her. Let me check our system," she said weakly. "Of course," Ahmed replied. "I should also mention that Mr. Thompson's father, Robert Thompson, specifically requested that I ensure his son's travel goes smoothly. If there are any issues, Mr. Thompson asked me to contact him directly. Would you prefer to speak with him personally?" Catherine looked like she might faint. That won't be necessary right now," she managed to say. She handed the phone back to Marcus while fumbling for her tablet with shaking hands. Her fingers moved unsteadily as she navigated to the airline's corporate booking verification system. Marcus spoke quietly into the phone. "Thank you, Ahmed. I'll contact you once we're airborne to confirm our meeting schedule." "Of course, Marcus," Ahmed replied, his voice warm with concern. "I trust everything will be resolved properly. Please don't hesitate to call if you need any additional assistance. Your father specifically instructed me to ensure your journey goes smoothly." As Marcus ended the call, Catherine was staring at her tablet screen with growing alarm. The information was all there, displayed in clear, official text. Thompson Global Trading, Gold Corporate Account. Account status, active, Tier 1 priority. Booking reference, TGT 2024-MC-4521. Passenger, Marcus Thompson. Class, Business. Seat assignment, 2A. Status, confirmed and fully paid. Special notes, VIP corporate travel, handle with priority care. But the details that made Catherine's hands shake were the account statistics displayed below the booking information. Thompson Global Trading had paid over $1.8 million in airfare to the airline over the past 4 years. They ranked among the airline's top 50 corporate accounts worldwide, with a perfect payment history and frequent high-value bookings. The tablet also showed Marcus's individual travel history with the airline. Dozens of flights over the past 3 years, always in premium cabins, always paid for by the corporate account. Never a single incident or complaint. Catherine looked up at Marcus with a mixture of shock and embarrassment, then glanced around at the passengers who were watching expectantly. The elderly couple in row 1 looked confused. Gerald Patterson appeared stunned. Jennifer Wu wore an expression that suggested she had suspected something like this might happen. There appears to have been a misunderstanding, Mr. Thompson. Please accept my sincere apologies." Gerald Patterson, who had been so vocal just minutes earlier, was now studying his newspaper with intense concentration, clearly trying to avoid eye contact with Marcus or anyone else in the cabin. "It's quite all right, Miss Walsh," Marcus replied graciously, his tone showing no trace of anger or vindictiveness. But Catherine knew the situation was far from resolved. Her supervisor, Michael Chen, had been observing the entire exchange from the galley and was now approaching with obvious concern etched on his face. Michael had 25 years of experience with the airline and had seen his share of passenger conflicts, but something about this situation felt different and potentially explosive. "Catherine," Michael said quietly, "what's the current status here?" Catherine's voice wavered slightly. Everything has been resolved, sir.
There was a verification issue with Mr. Thompson's booking that has now been clarified.
Michael turned to Marcus with an expression of genuine concern and professional embarrassment. Mr. Thompson, I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience you've experienced today. Is there anything we can do to ensure your comfort during the flight? Marcus smiled warmly, showing no trace of resentment despite what he had just endured. Thank you, Mr. Chen. I appreciate your professionalism. I just hope this kind of situation doesn't happen to other passengers. Michael nodded gravely. I can assure you we'll be reviewing our procedures to prevent similar incidents in the future. As the crew members dispersed to prepare for departure, the atmosphere in the business class cabin had completely transformed. The same passengers who had been staring at Marcus with suspicion and hostility just minutes earlier were now avoiding his gaze entirely, their earlier certainty replaced by obvious embarrassment. The elderly woman in row 1 leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Harold, we made terrible assumptions about that young man. I feel awful." Her husband nodded grimly. "We certainly did, Margaret. We certainly did." Gerald Patterson was particularly uncomfortable, occasionally glancing toward Marcus with what appeared to be genuine shame. The man who had so confidently declared that Marcus didn't belong was now confronting the reality that he had publicly embarrassed himself while attempting to embarrass someone else. Dr. Ahmed caught Marcus's eye and nodded approvingly, a gesture that seemed to say he was pleased to see justice done. Jennifer Wu smiled at Marcus warmly, her expression conveying both relief and admiration for how he had handled the situation. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate and began its taxi to the runway, Marcus received a text message from his father. "Son, remember that true strength lies not in demanding respect, but in maintaining your dignity when others forget theirs. How did your morning go?" Marcus typed back, "Your wisdom served me well today, Dad. I'll have quite a story to share when I get back." 20 minutes later, as Flight 447 climbed to its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet, the incident that had seemed so significant on the ground began to take a different perspective. But its effects were far from over. In fact, the real impact was just beginning. Catherine approached Marcus's seat with a beverage cart, her entire demeanor transformed from the authoritative figure who had confronted him earlier. She was now respectful, almost deferential, and clearly struggling with how to interact with him. "Mr. Thompson, may I offer you something to drink? We have fresh juices, sparkling water, coffee, or tea." "Orange juice would be wonderful, thank you." As Catherine poured the juice with noticeably shaking hands, she hesitated before speaking. "Mr. Thompson, I want to personally apologize again for how I handled the situation earlier. I made assumptions that were completely unprofessional and inappropriate." Marcus looked at her with genuine kindness. "Ms. Walsh, we all make mistakes. What's important is that we learn from them and commit to treating every person with dignity and respect." "You're absolutely right," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. "I should have verified your information properly from the beginning, rather than making judgments based on things that should never factor into how we treat people. I appreciate you acknowledging that. It shows real character and integrity." After Catherine moved on to serve other passengers, Gerald Patterson cleared his throat softly. Marcus turned to see the older man looking at him with obvious discomfort.
"Excuse me," Gerald said hesitantly. "I owe you a sincere apology." Marcus gave him his full attention, his expression open and non-judgmental. "The things I said earlier were completely inappropriate and wrong," Gerald continued. "I made assumptions about you that were unfair and, frankly, prejudiced. There's no excuse for my behavior." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for saying that, Mr. Patterson. It takes courage and character to admit when we've been wrong." Gerald was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with his emotions. "May I ask you something personal?" he finally said. "Of course." "How did you remain so composed throughout that entire ordeal?
If someone had treated me the way we treated you, I would have been furious. I probably would have made a scene that would have gotten me thrown off the plane." Marcus considered the question carefully. "My father taught me something important about dealing with injustice and prejudice. He said that anger is rarely the solution to unfair treatment. When people act badly toward you, it usually says much more about their character than it does about yours." He paused, looking out the window at the clouds below before continuing. "My responsibility isn't to change their hearts. Only God can do that. My responsibility is to conduct myself with honor and dignity, regardless of how others choose to behave." Gerald nodded slowly. "Your father sounds like a remarkable man." "He is," Marcus replied. "He built our business from nothing, facing countless obstacles and discrimination along the way. But he never allowed bitterness to take root in his heart. He taught me that success achieved through integrity and perseverance is the only kind worth pursuing." "I think I could benefit greatly from adopting that philosophy," Gerald said quietly. "I realize now that I've been carrying around prejudices that I never even acknowledged, let alone examined." Marcus smiled. "Recognition is the first step toward change. We all have unconscious biases. The key is being willing to confront them when they're revealed." An hour into the flight, word of the boarding incident had quietly spread throughout the aircraft. Flight attendants had whispered the details to each other during their service routines. Passengers had shared bits of information with their seatmates. By the time they were over the Pacific Ocean, most people on the plane knew that the young man who had been questioned and nearly removed from business class was actually the son of one of the airline's major corporate clients. But what impressed people more than Marcus's family's business success was how he had handled the entire confrontation. Passengers who had witnessed the exchange were struck by his composure, his refusal to respond with anger or hostility, and his gracious treatment of those who had wronged him. During the meal service, something unprecedented happened. Diana Roberts, a middle-aged African-American woman from economy class, approached the business class cabin. She was a social worker from Oakland who had saved for 2 years to afford her ticket to Dubai, where her daughter was working as a teacher at an international school. "Excuse me," Diana said politely to the flight attendant. "I was wondering if I could speak briefly with the gentleman in seat 2A? The flight attendant looked confused, but agreed to ask Marcus. When she explained the request, Marcus immediately agreed to meet with Diana. "Mr. Thompson," Diana said as she approached his seat, "I hope you don't mind the interruption. I'm Diana Roberts." "Not at all. Mrs. Roberts, please have a seat for a moment." Marcus gestured to the empty aisle seat next to him.
"I heard about what happened during boarding," Diana began, "and I wanted to personally thank you." Marcus looked puzzled. "Thank me for what?" "For the way you conducted yourself. I have a son who's about your age, and he sometimes struggles with anger when people judge him unfairly or treat him with prejudice. Seeing situations like his play out over and over again, he's developed a lot of bitterness and resentment." Diana's voice became emotional as she continued. "I'm going to share your story with him when I get back, about how you maintained your dignity and let your character speak louder than their prejudices. That kind of example is exactly what young people need to see." Marcus was genuinely moved. "That's very kind of you to say, Mrs. Roberts. I hope it helps." "It's not just kind, it's necessary," Diana replied firmly. "You represented yourself, your family, and honestly all of us with such grace today. You showed that the right response to injustice isn't anger or retaliation. It's maintaining your integrity and letting the truth reveal itself." After Diana returned to her seat, Marcus reflected deeply on their conversation. He thought about how differently the morning could have unfolded if he had responded with anger or defensiveness to Catherine's accusations. One phone call had not only resolved the immediate conflict, but it also provided an example that might influence how others approach similar situations in their own lives. 3 hours into the flight, Catherine made an announcement over the intercom that surprised everyone on board. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your senior flight attendant speaking. I'd like to take a moment to remind all passengers that courtesy and respect should be extended to everyone aboard our aircraft, regardless of age, appearance, background, or any other factor. We are all fellow travelers on this journey, and every person deserves to be treated with dignity and kindness. Thank you for your attention. Several passengers glanced toward Marcus, understanding immediately that the announcement was inspired by the morning's events. For Catherine, making that announcement was both an acknowledgement of her mistake and a commitment to do better in the future. As they began their approach to Dubai 14 hours later, Gerald Patterson had been writing something on airline stationery for the past hour. He now folded the papers carefully and handed them to Marcus. Marcus, I've written 2 letters. One is a letter of recommendation for your business. I'm the regional director for Patterson Logistics, and we're always looking for reliable suppliers and partners. If Thomson Global Trading is ever interested in expanding your distribution network in the Southeast, I'd be honored to facilitate those conversations. Marcus accepted the letter with genuine surprise. Mr. Patterson, this is incredibly generous. Thank you. It's the least I can do, Gerald replied. But there's a second letter as well. He handed Marcus another envelope. This one is to your father. I've written to tell him about the remarkable character and wisdom his son demonstrated today. Any business owner would be proud to have someone like you representing their company. Marcus was touched by Gerald's gesture. You really didn't need to do this. Yes, I did, Gerald said firmly. This morning I behaved in a way that I'm deeply ashamed of. But watching you respond to my prejudice and ignorance with such grace has taught me something important about the kind of person I want to be. As Flight 447 touched down at Dubai International Airport, Marcus gathered his belongings and prepared for what he hoped would be successful business meetings. But before disembarking, Catherine approached him one final time. Mr. Thompson, I've written a letter to our corporate headquarters recommending significant changes in how we handle passenger verification and boarding procedures. What happened this morning should never happen to anyone, and I want to make sure it doesn't.
Marcus was impressed by her initiative. Ms. Walsh, that's really admirable. Positive change often starts with people who are willing to acknowledge problems and work towards solutions. I learned that from watching you today, Catherine replied. Your response to unfair treatment was more powerful and effective than any complaint or lawsuit could have been. You turned a negative situation into an opportunity for learning and growth. At the gate in Dubai, Marcus was met by Ahmed El-Rashid, the Dubai operations manager, who had taken his phone call during the boarding crisis. Ahmed was a tall, dignified man in his 40s, with graying temples and the bearing of someone accustomed to handling complex business situations. Marcus, Ahmed said warmly, embracing him in the traditional Middle Eastern greeting, how was your flight? Marcus grinned broadly, educational in ways I never could have expected. Ahmed raised an eyebrow. Educational how? I learned that sometimes the most effective response to injustice and prejudice isn't to fight back aggressively, but to stand firmly in truth and allow others to see themselves clearly in the mirror of your character. That sounds very much like your father's wisdom, Ahmed observed. I hope I'm learning to apply it well, Marcus replied. That evening, from his suite at the Burj El Arab, overlooking the glittering Dubai skyline, Marcus called his parents to update them on his safe arrival and to share the extraordinary events of the day. How was your flight, son? Robert asked when the family gathered around the speakerphone. Marcus recounted the entire story in detail, from Catherine's initial confrontation to Gerald's letters of recommendation. He described the transformation he had witnessed in the passengers around him and the conversations that had grown out of the incident. His mother, Patricia, was less philosophical than her husband about what had occurred. That flight attendant had absolutely no business treating you that way. I'm glad that phone call set her straight. Mom, Marcus replied gently. Catherine was acting based on assumptions and biases that she probably wasn't even fully aware she held. The real problem isn't individual prejudice. It's that we all carry unconscious biases that influence how we treat others. Today just brought some of those biases into the light where they could be examined and addressed. Robert chuckled with paternal pride. Listen to my son speaking like a wise elder statesman. But you're absolutely right, Marcus. The goal isn't to punish people for their prejudices, it's to help them recognize and overcome them. Exactly, Dad. And who knows, maybe some of those passengers will think more carefully before making snap judgments about others. Maybe Catherine will approach future situations with more openness and fairness. If that happens, then today's difficulty will have served a greater purpose. I'm proud of you, son. His voice thick with emotion. Not because you're successful in business, but because you're growing into a man of genuine character and wisdom. The following morning, Marcus woke to several messages on his phone that would mark the beginning of an even more remarkable chapter in this story. The first message was from Catherine Walsh. Mr. Thompson, I haven't been able to stop thinking about yesterday's incident. I've already spoken with my supervisor about implementing enhanced bias awareness training for all our crew members. I also wanted you to know that I've been personally recommending Thompson Global Trading to business travelers who inquire about halal
Food suppliers, thank you for your patience and grace under such difficult circumstances. Your example has changed how I think about my job and my responsibility to treat every passenger with dignity. Another message came from Dr. Ahmed, the surgeon who had been seated nearby. I was sitting in seat 3C yesterday and observed the entire situation. I want you to know that your dignified response to that inexcusable treatment has caused me to seriously examine my own assumptions about people. As a physician, I pride myself on being objective and fair, but I realized yesterday that I too sometimes make snap judgments based on appearance. Thank you for providing such a powerful example of grace under pressure. But the message that surprised Marcus most came from Gerald Patterson. Marcus, I shared our conversation with my family last night. My teenage son asked if he could write about the incident for his school newspaper, focusing on the importance of not judging people by their appearance or assumptions about their background. Would you be comfortable with him including your story? He was genuinely inspired by your maturity and wisdom, and he thinks other young people could benefit from hearing about how you handled such a difficult situation. Marcus smiled as he typed his response. Of course, if sharing this story helps even one person think more carefully about their assumptions and prejudices, then yesterday's difficulties were more than worthwhile. Over the next 3 days, Marcus's meetings in Dubai exceeded all expectations. The contracts he negotiated with major food distributors would increase Thompson Global Trading's revenue by 300% over the next 2 years. But more importantly, he had established relationships built on trust and mutual respect that would serve the company for decades to come. On his final day in Dubai, Marcus received a call that would change everything. The caller ID showed his father's office number in Los Angeles. "Marcus, this is absolutely remarkable," Robert said without preamble. When Marcus answered, "We've received calls from 4 different companies wanting to discuss distribution partnerships and strategic alliances. Apparently, word has gotten around about how you handled yourself on that flight." "Really? How did they hear about it?" "It seems that Gerald Patterson has been sharing your story with his business contacts throughout the logistics and distribution industry. He's been telling them about a young man who demonstrated such exceptional character under pressure that they should seriously consider doing business with his family's company." Marcus was amazed. "I never expected anything like that to come from such a difficult situation." "Son, this is a perfect example of what I've always taught you. When you conduct yourself with integrity and character, people notice. Sometimes the most powerful marketing and networking happens not through what you say about yourself, but through how you respond when tested by adversity." "It's incredible how God can use even negative experiences for good," Marcus reflected. "Indeed it is, son. Indeed it is." Over the following weeks and months, the ripple effects of Flight 447 continued to spread in ways that none of the participants could have anticipated. Marcus received dozens of messages from passengers who had been on the plane, all expressing how the incident had affected their perspectives and, in many cases, changed their behavior. One particularly moving message came from Diana Roberts, the economy class passenger who had thanked him during the flight. "Marcus, I wanted to update you on the conversation I had with my son about your experience. The impact has been profound and lasting.
Instead of responding to discrimination and prejudice with anger and bitterness, he's been focusing on demonstrating his character and letting his actions speak for themselves. His grades have improved dramatically, his attitude toward authority figures has become more positive, and he's developed real confidence in his ability to handle difficult situations.
He told me he wants to be the kind of person who changes minds through his actions, just like you did on that airplane. Another message came from a flight attendant named Sarah Chen, who had been working in economy class during Marcus's flight. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Sarah Chen, and I was working in the rear cabin during your flight to Dubai. What happened in business class became a major topic of discussion among our entire crew, both during the flight and in the weeks that followed. Several of us have requested additional training on unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity. We've also started a peer support group to help each other recognize and address our own assumptions and prejudices. Your example showed us that passengers aren't just customers or potential problems. They're human beings deserving of dignity and respect." 6 months after the flight, Marcus received an unexpected phone call from Catherine Walsh that would lead to one of the most meaningful developments in the entire story. "Mr. Thompson, I hope you remember me. I was the flight attendant who treated you so poorly on your flight to Dubai." "Of course I remember you, Miss Walsh. How you doing?" "I'm calling because I wanted to update you on some significant changes that have occurred as a direct result of our encounter. The airline has implemented comprehensive bias awareness training for all customer-facing employees, from gate agents to flight crews to customer service representatives. More importantly, I've been promoted to training supervisor specifically to oversee these new programs." Marcus was genuinely pleased. "That's wonderful news, Miss Walsh. It sounds like you've turned a difficult situation into an opportunity for positive change throughout your organization." "That's exactly what I've done. And I learned how to do that by watching you," Catherine replied. "Your response to my prejudice and poor treatment taught me more about leadership and character than any training manual or management course ever could. I'm honored that you found the experience helpful in your professional development." "There's something else, Mr. Thompson. The airline's executive leadership would like to invite you to speak at our annual training conference next month. We want our employees to hear directly from someone who experienced discrimination but responded with such grace and wisdom. Would you be willing to do that?" Marcus considered the offer carefully. "If it would help prevent other passengers from experiencing what I went through, and if it might help your employees develop more awareness and sensitivity, I'd be happy to participate." A year after the incident on Flight 447, Marcus found himself standing on a stage in front of 2,000 airline employees at the company's annual training conference in Phoenix. His presentation, titled "Character Under Pressure: Responding to Injustice with Integrity," had drawn attendees from across the airline's global network. As Marcus began his presentation, he could see Catherine Walsh sitting in the front row, now wearing the uniform insignia of her new position as training supervisor. In the audience were pilots, flight attendants, gate agents, customer service representatives, and management personnel from every level of the organization. "A little over a year ago," Marcus began, "I boarded Flight 447 from Los Angeles to Dubai with a simple business class ticket and a head full of dreams about expanding my family's business. I had no idea that the next few hours would become a defining moment, not just in my life, but in the lives of many others." He told the story methodically, from Catherine's initial confrontation to the phone call that changed everything. But more importantly, he talked about the lessons learned and the positive changes that had emerged from what began as a negative experience. "I want to emphasize something crucial," Marcus said, as he neared the end of his presentation. "This story isn't about me being a victim or about punishing those who treated me poorly. It's about the power we all have to choose our response when faced with difficult situations." During the question and answer session, a flight attendant from the Chicago hub raised her hand. "Mr. Thompson, what advice would you give to someone who faces discrimination but doesn't have the business connections you had? Not everyone can make a phone call that immediately changes the power dynamic."
Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That's an excellent and important question, but I want to emphasize something that I think sometimes gets lost in the retelling of this story. The phone call didn't change anyone's heart or mind,
My response to their treatment did. He continued, the call simply provided information that forced them to confront their assumptions, but what made the lasting difference was remaining calm, treating everyone with respect, and maintaining my dignity under pressure. Those qualities are available to every person, regardless of their connections, background, or resources. The real power, Marcus explained, wasn't in revealing who my father was or what company I represented. The real power was in refusing to let their treatment change who I was as a person. Character isn't about having resources or connections. It's about choosing to respond with integrity even when others don't. After his presentation, Marcus was approached by Kevin Martinez, a 17-year-old who had attended the conference as part of a youth leadership program. "Mr. Thompson," Kevin said nervously, "my name is Kevin Martinez. I'm 17, and I face situations similar to yours pretty regularly, but I usually get angry and end up making things worse for myself. After hearing your story today, I want to learn how to respond the way you did." Marcus spent 30 minutes talking with Kevin, sharing practical strategies for maintaining composure under pressure and finding constructive ways to address unfair treatment. He gave Kevin his business card and invited him to stay in touch. "Remember," Marcus told the young man, "how others treat you is about them. How you respond is about you. You can't control their actions, but you can always control your character." 6 months later, Marcus received a handwritten letter from Kevin that brought tears to his eyes. "Dear Mr. Thompson, I wanted to update you on how your advice has changed my life. Last month, I was wrongly accused of shoplifting at a store where I shop regularly. Instead of getting angry and defensive like I usually would, I stayed calm, asked to speak with the manager, and explained the situation respectfully. Not only did they apologize and review the security footage that proved my innocence, but the manager was so impressed with how I handled myself that he offered me a part-time job. I start next week, and he said my maturity and composure under pressure were exactly the qualities they look for in their employees. I've also been accepted to USC with a partial scholarship. My guidance counselor said my essay about learning to respond to adversity with character instead of anger was one of the most powerful she'd ever read. Thank you for showing me that character is more powerful than anger, and that how we respond to injustice can be more important than the injustice itself. Sincerely, Kevin Martinez. P.S. I've been sharing your story with friends who face similar challenges. 3 of them have already told me it's helped them handle difficult situations better." Marcus shared Kevin's letter with his parents over dinner that evening, at their family home in Los Angeles, the same modest house where Robert had started Thompson Global Trading in the garage, now served as headquarters for a company that employed over 200 people and generated annual revenues of $50 million. "You see, son," Patricia said, her eyes misting as she read Kevin's letter. "That phone call you made didn't just solve one problem on one airplane. It started a chain reaction of positive change that's still spreading to young people like Kevin." Robert nodded approvingly. "This is the true measure of success, Marcus. Not the money we earn or the recognition we receive, but the positive impact we have on other people's lives." Marcus carefully folded Kevin's letter. "You know what strikes me most about this whole experience? I came very close to losing my temper that day on the plane. If I had responded with anger instead of patience, if I had let their treatment bring out the worst in me instead of challenging me to be my best, none of these good outcomes would have happened."
"But you didn't lose your temper," his father observed. "You chose the path of wisdom and character. And look at the difference that choice has made. Not just for you, but for Catherine, for Gerald, for Kevin, and for countless others." 2 years after Flight 447, Marcus received an invitation that surprised him. He was asked to join the airline's Customer Experience Advisory Board, a group of frequent travelers and business leaders who provide input on service improvements and policy changes. At his first board meeting, held in the airline's corporate headquarters in Dallas, Marcus was surprised to see Catherine Walsh sitting at the conference table. She had been promoted again, this time to Director of Customer Relations, and was now responsible for policy development across the airline's entire network. "Marcus," Catherine said warmly after the meeting concluded, "I'm so pleased you've joined our advisory board." "It's great to see you again, Catherine. Congratulations on your continued success." "Thank you. I have to tell you, that incident on Flight 447 changed the entire trajectory of my career. It made me realize that my true calling was helping create positive change in how we treat customers and address the unconscious biases that can affect service delivery." "I'm glad something so positive came from what began as such a difficult experience." "More than you know, Marcus. The training programs and policy changes we developed as a result of that day have been adopted by airlines throughout the industry. Your example has influenced how hundreds of thousands of employees interact with passengers around the world." Catherine continued, "We've also established the Thompson Award for Excellence in Customer Relations, an annual recognition for employees who demonstrate exceptional character in challenging situations. Would you be willing to help present the first awards at our ceremony next month?" As Marcus drove home from the meeting, he reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with such a simple thing, a phone call on an airplane. What had started as a moment of potential humiliation had become a catalyst for widespread positive change in an entire industry. That evening, Marcus shared the day's events with his wife, Sarah, whom he had married the previous year. Sarah was a pediatric nurse who shared Marcus's values and commitment to treating every person with dignity and respect. "It's amazing how God can use our difficulties for good, isn't it?" Sarah observed, as they sat together on their apartment balcony overlooking the lights of downtown Los Angeles. "That phone call didn't just prove you belonged in business class. It proved that character and dignity can triumph over prejudice and assumption." "You're right," Marcus agreed. "And the most powerful part wasn't the revelation of who I was or what business I represented. The most powerful part was the demonstration of who I chose to be when faced with injustice and unfair treatment." 3 years after the incident, Marcus was invited to speak at Harvard Business School about corporate social responsibility and character-based leadership. His case study, Flight 447, How One Response to Injustice Changed an Industry, had become required reading in several business ethics programs. During his presentation to 300 MBA students, Marcus emphasized the same themes he had been sharing since that transformative day. "Leadership isn't about having power over others," he told the future business leaders. "True leadership is about how you use whatever power you have to lift others up and create positive change. Sometimes the most powerful leadership happens not when you're in charge, but when you're being tested by circumstances beyond your control." A student raised her hand. "Mr. Thompson, some critics have suggested that your story reinforces the idea that minorities have to be twice as good or exceptionally patient to succeed. How do you respond to that criticism?"
Marcus considered the question carefully. "That's a thoughtful and important point. I want to be clear that I'm not suggesting anyone should have to endure discrimination patiently. Injustice should always be challenged and addressed." He continued, "What I am suggesting is that we have choices about how we respond to unfair treatment. We can respond with anger and perpetuate cycles of negativity, or we can respond with character and create opportunities for positive change. The goal isn't to be patient with injustice. The goal is to be strategic about how we fight it." "My response wasn't about being twice as good," Marcus explained. "It was about refusing to let other people's poor behavior bring out poor behavior in me. That's a principle that applies to everyone, regardless of their background or the nature of the challenges they face. After his presentation, Marcus was approached by Dr. Jennifer Chen, an organizational behavior professor who had been studying the long-term impacts of bias training programs. Mr. Thompson, I've been following the changes that have occurred in the airline industry since your incident. The data is remarkable. Airlines that have implemented comprehensive bias training programs similar to what your story inspired have seen significant improvements in customer satisfaction scores, particularly among minority passengers. But perhaps more importantly, they've seen reductions in discrimination complaints across all demographic groups. That's encouraging to hear, Marcus replied. Do you think the changes are sustainable? The evidence suggests they are, Dr. Chen said. When organizations commit to ongoing training and create systems for accountability, positive changes tend to become embedded in the culture. Your story provided a catalyst, but the lasting change has come from consistent follow-through. 4 years after Flight 447, Marcus received a letter that would profoundly impact his understanding of the story's broader significance. The letter came from Captain Robert Williams, the pilot who had been in command of that memorable flight. Dear Mr. Thompson, you may not remember me, but I was the captain of Flight 447 on the day you experienced that unfortunate incident in our business class cabin. I've been following the positive changes that have emerged from that difficult experience, and I felt compelled to share some thoughts with you. As a pilot with 30 years of experience, I've witnessed countless passenger situations, but few have stayed with me the way yours has. What impressed me most wasn't just your composure during the incident, but the grace you showed in the aftermath. I want you to know that your example has influenced how I approach my own leadership responsibilities. When I face challenging situations with crew members or difficult decisions about passenger issues, I often ask myself, how would Marcus Thompson handle this? What would character and integrity require in this moment? Last month, I had the opportunity to mentor a young pilot who was struggling with emotional management issues. I shared your story with him, and it made a profound impact. He's since committed to working on his emotional responses and has become one of our most respected junior officers. Your story has become legendary among our flight crews, not as an example of a problem passenger or a discrimination incident, but as a masterclass in character under pressure. Thank you for showing us that true strength lies not in demanding respect, but in maintaining dignity when others forget theirs. With admiration and gratitude, Captain Robert Williams. Marcus shared Captain Williams' letter with his father during one of their weekly evening walks through their old neighborhood. These walks had become a cherished tradition, a time for them to discuss business, family, and the lessons life continued to teach them.
You know, son, Robert said, as they paused at the corner where Marcus used to wait for the school bus. When I first started this business, I thought success would be measured in dollars and market share. I never imagined that my greatest pride would come from watching my son handle adversity with such wisdom and grace. I learned everything from watching you, Dad, Marcus replied. You showed me that how we treat people matters more than how much money we make, and that character is the only thing that truly belongs to us. But you took those lessons and applied them in ways I never could have imagined, Robert observed. That day on the airplane, you didn't just represent our family well. You became a teacher for thousands of people you've never even met. 5 years after the incident, Marcus was invited to deliver the keynote address at the National Conference on Workplace Equity and Inclusion. His speech, delivered to an audience of 5,000 HR professionals, diversity officers, and corporate executives, was titled The Ripple Effect: How Individual Character Can Transform Organizations. 5 years ago, Marcus began. I was a young man with a business class ticket and a dream of expanding my family's company. Today, I stand before you as someone who has learned that our response to adversity can be more powerful than the adversity itself. He told the familiar story, but with 5 years of perspective and accumulated wisdom. He spoke about the letters he had received, the young people who had been inspired to handle their own challenges differently, and the organizational changes that had spread throughout the airline industry. The lesson isn't that discrimination is acceptable or that victims of unfair treatment should remain silent, Marcus emphasized. The lesson is that we have choices about how we respond to injustice, and those choices can either perpetuate negative cycles or create opportunities for positive change. During the Q&A session, a diversity officer from a major corporation asked, "Mr. Thompson, what advice would you give to organizations that want to create the kind of positive change you've described but don't know where to start?" Marcus thought carefully before responding. Start with the recognition that everyone, every single person, carries unconscious biases. These aren't character flaws, they're human nature. The key is creating systems and cultures that help people recognize these biases and make better choices. He continued, "Don't wait for a crisis or a viral incident to force change. Be proactive about examining your policies, training your people, and creating environments where everyone feels valued and respected. And most importantly, make sure that when people do make mistakes, they're met with opportunities for learning and growth rather than just punishment." After the conference, Marcus was approached by Dr. Sarah Martinez, the director of a national research institute studying the effectiveness of bias intervention programs. "Mr. Thompson, we've been conducting a longitudinal study of the changes in airline industry practices since your incident became public. The results are quite remarkable." Dr. Martinez continued, "Airlines that implemented comprehensive bias training programs showed a 60% reduction in discrimination complaints within 2 years. Customer satisfaction scores improved across all demographic groups, and employee retention rates increased significantly. But perhaps most importantly, we documented measurable changes in employee attitudes and behaviors that have persisted over time." "What do you attribute the lasting impact to?" Marcus asked. "Several factors," Dr. Martinez replied. "First, your story provided a compelling narrative that helped people understand both the problem and a positive way to address it. Second, organizations didn't just implement one-time training programs, they created ongoing systems for accountability and continuous improvement. Third, the changes were driven not by compliance requirements, but by genuine commitment to doing better." 6 years after Flight 447, Marcus received an invitation that represented the culmination of his unexpected journey as an advocate for character and dignity. He was asked to serve on the Federal Aviation Administration's Advisory Committee on Passenger Rights and Airline Industry Practices.
The appointment came with a letter from the Secretary of Transportation. "Mr. Thompson, your example of responding to discrimination with dignity and your subsequent work to promote positive change in airline industry practices have made you a recognized leader in the field of transportation equity. We believe your perspective and experience would be invaluable as we work to ensure that all passengers are treated with fairness and respect." At his first committee meeting in Washington, D.C., Marcus found himself seated alongside airline executives, consumer advocates, legal experts, and government officials. The agenda focused on developing new federal guidelines for bias prevention and discrimination response in the transportation industry. During his opening statement to the committee, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to that conference room. 6 years ago, I was just a young man trying to get to a business meeting. Today, I have the privilege of working with all of you
to ensure that other travelers don't face the challenges I experienced. This transformation didn't happen because I sought conflict or publicity. It happened because ordinary people chose to learn from a difficult situation and commit to positive change. 1 year later, the committee's recommendations became federal law, requiring all airlines to implement comprehensive bias training programs, establish clear procedures for handling discrimination complaints, and report annually on their progress in creating inclusive environments for passengers and employees. Marcus was invited to the White House for the bill signing ceremony. As he stood in the Rose Garden, watching the president sign the legislation that had grown from his experience on Flight 447, he thought about all the lives that had been touched by that single phone call 7 years earlier. Later that evening, at a reception celebrating the new legislation, Marcus was approached by Catherine Walsh, who had been promoted to Senior Vice President of Customer Experience for her airline. "Marcus," Catherine said, "I've been thinking about something all day. 7 years ago, I made terrible assumptions about you based on nothing more than your appearance. Today, I watched you help create federal legislation that will protect millions of passengers from experiencing what I put you through." She paused, her voice emotional. "I've spent my entire career since that day trying to undo the harm of those few minutes when I forgot that every passenger is a human being deserving of dignity. Thank you for showing me a better way." Marcus smiled warmly. "Catherine, your transformation has been one of the most inspiring parts of this entire journey. You turned a moment of poor judgment into a lifetime commitment to positive change. That takes real courage and character." That night, from his hotel room overlooking the Capitol, Marcus called his parents to share the day's historic events. "I watched the ceremony on television," Robert said, his voice thick with pride. "Seeing my son help create federal legislation that will protect people from discrimination. I never could have imagined such a thing when you were that little boy helping me load boxes in our garage. It all started with the lessons you taught me, Dad, about treating people with dignity, about responding to adversity with character, about using whatever influence we have to lift others up. But you took those lessons and touched the world with them, son. That phone call you made on the airplane didn't just solve your immediate problem. It started a movement that's now codified in federal law." Catherine's voice joined the conversation. "Marcus, I want you to know that your father and I receive letters almost every week from parents whose children have been inspired by your story. Young people who have learned to respond to bullying and discrimination with character instead of anger. Parents who have changed how they teach their children about handling adversity. The ripples just keep spreading, and they're all positive ripples, creating more dignity, more understanding, more character in the world." As Marcus prepared for sleep that night, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with such a simple thing, a phone call on an airplane. What had started as a moment of potential humiliation had become a catalyst for federal legislation, industry transformation, and countless individual moments of growth and positive change. He thought about Kevin Martinez, now a college graduate working as a social worker, who credited Marcus's example with teaching him how to handle adversity. About Catherine Walsh, whose career had been transformed by her commitment to undoing the harm of her prejudiced assumptions. About Gerald Patterson, who had become an advocate for diversity and inclusion in his own company after confronting his own biases. Marcus thought about the thousands of airline employees who had participated in bias training programs inspired by his story, and the millions of passengers who would benefit from the new federal protections that grew from his experience on Flight 447. But most of all, he thought about the central lesson that had guided every step of this remarkable journey, that our response to injustice can be more powerful than the injustice itself, and that character under pressure has the power to transform not just our own lives, but the lives of everyone we touch. The young man who had been questioned about his right to sit in business class had not only proven his place there, but had shown the world what true class really means. And in doing so, he had created ripples of positive change that would continue to spread for generations to come. The phone call that had shocked everyone on Flight 447 wasn't really about business connections or family wealth. It was about the power of character to triumph over prejudice, the strength found in dignity under pressure, and the truth that when we respond to injustice with integrity, we create possibilities for genuine transformation that extend far beyond our own immediate circumstances. 7 years later, as Marcus drifted off to sleep in that Washington hotel room, he smiled at the thought that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to continue the work that had begun so unexpectedly on an airplane, the work of creating a more just, more dignified, and more character-driven world for everyone.